The Adventures of Robin Hood by Patricia Leitch. Robin Fitzooth stood outside the gates of Loxley Hall. He was looking back the way he had just come, back at the home of his boyhood that was his no more. 3 years ago his father had died, and Robin had inherited the estates of Loxley. Since he had become the Earl of Huntingdon, Robin had lived a wild and merry life. He could never resist a wager. More than anything, he loved to set himself against another for a trial of strength, betting high sums on who could shoot the truest, ride the fastest, or wrestle the most skillfully. Days of sport were followed by nights of feasting, and the dead father's fortune slipped through his son's fingers like air. 2 years after his father's death, Robin had found himself in desperate need of money to pay off his debts. Much of his father's wealth had been invested in trading ventures, and he knew that merchants would be returning from abroad, bringing him money. "I will go to the monastery of St. Marie's and ask to speak with the abbot," he decided. When the abbot heard of Robin's plight, he willingly agreed to lend him £500 on the condition that the money should be paid back to him in full within 12 months. If this was not done, all the lands of Loxley and the Great Hall itself would belong to the abbot. Robin readily agreed to the bond, although he knew that the Loxley estates were worth far more than a mere £500, worth at least 10 times the amount of money he had borrowed from the abbot. "It does not matter," he told himself. "Long before April Day, I shall have money from my father's tradings. I shall pay the abbot back in plenty of time." But spring became summer, summer burnt into autumn, and autumn turned to winter. Throughout the months, plenty of money came to Robin from his father's trading ventures, but each time the money was spent on other things. There was always a faster horse to be bought, a hound that he had to possess, and wine to be laid in, friends who needed a loan, or peasants who came to the doors of Loxley Hall were never turned away. When March ended, Robin had only managed to gather together a little over half the money which he owed to the abbot. "The abbot is a holy man," he told himself. "He will not hold me to such an unjust bargain. I shall explain how matters stand, and promise him full payment on the very day I receive money from my father's trading." Late on the evening before April Day, a man in travel-stained clothing, mounted on a sweating horse, rode up to the doors of Loxley Hall and demanded to see the Earl of Huntingdon. A groom took his horse, and a servant led him into the room where Robin was sprawled on a chair, uselessly brooding on tomorrow. "Good sir," said the man, "I bring you word from Philip of Ware. He sends sincere regrets that his trading ventures, in which your father invested some £300, have been of such long duration. But I am here to tell you that his ship has now docked at Southampton, and within 3 days you will receive your share of the moneys." "How much?" gasped Robin. 3 times the amount your father invested." Robin's shouts of delight drowned the man's voice. Now he need no longer fear the abbot's demands. The bond would be repaid in full in 3 days' time. The abbot came with the first light of April Day. He did not come alone. 12 friars accompanied him, chosen not for their holiness, but for their strength. Behind the friars were 12 armed men in the livery of the Sheriff of Nottingham, a close friend of the abbot. The abbot sat in the great hall of Loxley and listened scornfully to Robin's explanations and excuses, and then commanded him to pay the bond money in full, or to leave all his lands to the abbot, as was clearly set down in the bond which he had signed. "I have told you," cried Robin. "In 3 days I will have enough money to repay the bond in full." "Our bond closes this day," said the abbot, "not in 3 days' time. Can you pay your bond this day?" "No, but then by right of the justice of our land I claim all the lands of Loxley." Seeing that the abbot truly meant to have his estates, Robin sprang up from his seat and set his hand to his sword. For a second he paused, unwilling to draw arms on a holy father of the church. In that second the sheriff's men had him by the arms and shoulders. Despite his struggles and protests, they held him tightly while the abbot formally took possession of Loxley Hall and all its lands. Then Robin was marched down the drive, thrust outside, and the gates of his home were barred against him. Robin sat down on a stone at the wayside. The sky was blue, the forest world about him shone green in the sunlight, and the singing of the birds made the trees dance with life. He stared around, and despite the hate which filled his heart against St. Marie's abbot, and the rage at his own fecklessness, he could not truly feel anything except joy at being alive and young on such a morning. I have my bow and my health, Robin thought, a quiver full of right good arrows, and a pair of well-soled boots upon my feet. I would be a poor spirit if I were to let such a louse as that abbot spoil such a day for me. Then Robin remembered that on April Day the sheriff was holding a shooting match in Nottingham. The prize was to be a butt of October brewed ale, and it was to go to the man who shot the truest in the whole of Nottinghamshire. When we have drunk the barrel of ale dry, I shall have made new friends, and be in a better mind to regain my father's house and lands, Robin thought as he stood up. He took one last long look at the grey towers of Loxley Hall, then swung round and strode out on the road to Nottingham. With each mile his heart grew lighter and his step more sure, for he knew that the butt of ale was his for the shooting. Young as he was, in the whole of Nottinghamshire there was no man who could shoot a straighter or a longer arrow than Robin of Loxley. He had gone some 8 miles when he came across a group of foresters sitting by the wayside, eating and drinking. They were all dressed in the livery of the king, and Robin would have passed by them without a word, but the men called out to him, asking him where he was going and why. Robin stopped and answered them squarely. "I'm on my way to Nottingham to shoot for the butt of ale." "Young cock-sparrow," shouted one of the men. "When did the likes of you even have the right to draw a bow before the sheriff?" At these words, Robin felt the hot blood rise to his head, but not wanting to fight, he tried to move on past the foresters, ignoring their jeers. Then one of the men sprang up and grabbed Robin by the shoulders, taunting him. "Shoot," he cried, his breath stinking against Robin's face. "You have not yet the strength in those chicken bones to draw back the string of that bow you carry so proudly." At the man's words, Robin's temper raged like flame, and he set an arrow to his bow. "I'll wager you 20 marks," he swore, "that by the grace of Our Lady I shall take the buck from the deer who graze there." The men, seeing the distance of the herd, roared with laughter. "Young fool, to think that you could attempt such a shot," mocked one. "We'll take your wager," shouted another. Robin's arrow sank straight and true, and the buck sank down dead. "Now," cried Robin, his heart high at his own skill, "pay me the money I have won." The men had fallen silent, and now stared sullenly at Robin. "Get on with you," said the forester who had caught Robin by the shoulder. "We had no wager with you. You're a marked man now, as dead as the king's deer you have just killed. Were your brains as good as your aim, you should have known better than to have shot down a deer before the king's men. Think yourself lucky that we do not take you prisoner this minute." Robin turned and walked grimly away from them, hearing their mockery buzzing like a swarm of bees behind him. "Let this put feathers in your heels," yelled one of the foresters, and as he spoke, he set an arrow to his bow. The shaft skimmed past Robin's ear and landed in the mud in front of him. Robin spun round. The arrow from his bow had reached the throat of the forester almost before Robin knew what he was doing. The forester fell back, his life's blood spouting scarlet from his throat. His companions sprang to their feet, slipping bows from their shoulders, shouting with rage and astonishment. Some knelt to lift the dying man. Some took aim at Robin, who was already vanishing into the cover of the forest. All day Robin made his way deeper and deeper into the very heart of Sherwood. At first he followed the tracks and secret ways known to him all his life, but by evening he was approaching the depths of the forest where he had never dared to go before. He walked between giant oaks and beeches, their trunks as huge in the failing light as the mighty pillars of a cathedral. His hands and face were scarred and torn, where in his panic he had pushed his way through the undergrowth of briar and hazel. At last he stopped, standing still in the green, strained light of the forest evening, his spirit heavy with the knowledge that he had killed a man. He knelt on the mould of the forest floor and prayed to Our Lady for forgiveness. Kneeling there, he took an oath upon himself that only in the most dire extremity would he ever again kill a fellow man. It was on Robin's third day in the forest that he met up with 3 other outlaws, 2 men, one with a grizzled beard, the other with his ears cropped in punishment for some past crime, and a boy with a fox skin over his shoulders. They had lit a fire and were cooking meat. The smell of the food drew Robin to them. When he approached, they jumped up, the grizzled man grasping a stout stave in his hand. "Ho, stranger," he cried, "make yourself known, or you will feel my staff about your head." Robin spread open his hands. "I am one of you, brothers," he said, knowing that his words were true. He was brother now to all the forest outlaws. Doubly outlawed, once for killing the king's deer and once for the murder of the forester. If he were ever to be caught, his throat would wear the hangman's necklace and his feet would dance on air. Robin was about to add his name when the earless man interrupted him. "I think I know the cast of your face," he said. "When they cut my ears, they were not too particular about the knife they used. My wounds would not heal, and the suppuration entered my head. My wife, being told of a certain great house where she could obtain salves, went there and was given ointment that healed my head, and a gold piece which saved my children from starving." At the man's words, Robin felt a sweetness stir in him. Since he had killed the forester, all had been black as midnight. It had seemed to him that all his life was cursed until the man brought back to him the memory of the poor who had come to Loxley for alms and had never been turned away. The memory seemed to Robin to be a gift from Our Lady, and he swore in his heart always to be true to his vow. "If I am right," warned the earless man, "and I am sure I am, do not give it your name. Cutthroats and thieves live in this forest. If there is a price on your head, many of them will be pleased to lay hands on the reward. Forget your old name, take a new one. Become a new man of Sherwood." Robin of Loxley bowed his head to the man, knowing that he had been given good advice. "My name," he said, "is Robin of the Wood." "Nay," answered the grizzled man, "we are all of the wood. Let your name be Robin Hood. The hood you wear is rich enough to crown a king." "Then Robin Hood I am," agreed Robin, shaking them by the hand. They sat together and shared the stew, and when they had eaten, the grizzled man asked, "Will you join with us? Your arrows could find the heart of many a fat friar, and our fingers could pick gold from his saddlebags when he had no more need of it. We could grow rich together." Robin raised himself up on one elbow. "I have come into Sherwood," he said, "with an oath to Our Lady on my heart to take no man's life, to rob only the rich so that their wealth may be given to the poor, and to gather round me men who think the same as myself, so that in some way we may begin to put right the wrongs that inflict our land." "That's moonshine talk," said the grizzled man. "Line your own purse first." "Take gold where you can find it," agreed the other man. "The weaker the traveller, the less danger we will be in." Robin rose to his feet. "Then I must go on my way," he said. "For your companionship, my thanks." He walked away from them into the forest. He found a low, spreading oak, climbed into its branches, and eventually fell asleep. When Robin woke in the morning, the boy with the fox's skin was curled at the root of the tree. "I am your boy now," he replied when Robin questioned him. "What you said last night, that's what I feel. I do not want gold for myself. That is all those 2 ever think about. They do not care who they rob or kill. But I'm for what you said. Rob the rich to feed the poor. Let me stay with you." "By my oath, so you shall," cried Robin, grasping the boy's shoulders. "I shall call you Todd for the skin you wear. We shall be the first. They'll come to join us, others who share our longing for justice. By Our Lady, Todd, we will have a merry life in Sherwood." So Robin Hood began his life in Sherwood. Soon no one remembered his old name or where he had come from. But many heard of his new name and came into the forest to find him and join his band. Some were men with a price on their heads for breaking the unjust laws of the forest, or for misdeeds against the sheriff who, from Nottingham, governed the neighbouring area for the king. He was a man of power, having his own small army and caring little for any justice, being ruled only by his own greed. Some who came were peasants who could no longer endure their days of endless toil, the results of their labours being taken by the church in tithes, or by representatives of the king in taxes. There were true men sick at heart to see the England they loved in the hands of Norman barons, and had to watch impotently while the church grew as greedy and as cruel as the nobles. These and many more sought out Robin Hood in order to join his band of outlaws. Before they could join, they all had to swear the great oath, to rob the rich and give to the poor, to withstand tyranny and to harm neither woman or child. When they had sworn, Robin would shake them by the hand, clasp them by the shoulder, and welcome them to Sherwood. Each man was given a suit of Lincoln green, and each made for himself a bow of yew, and arrows that flew straight and sure. There was not one of the outlaws who did not worship Robin. They were awed by his skill with the bow and his wisdom of forest ways. They loved his light step, his ready laughter, and his bold heart that was always looking for new adventures. When they heard the sound of Robin's horn ringing through the forest, every man raced at full speed to answer the call, and there was not one of them who would not have given up his life to save his leader. It was spring again. Robin Hood had lived in Sherwood for 2 years, and had gathered about him close on 100 men. Yet on this May morning, he felt the need to go wandering on his own. "Stay here," he said to the outlaws who were with him. "It is too long since an adventure came my way, and if it will not come to me, then I must go and seek it out." Robin strode on alone through the forest, and came at last to one of the long, straight roads that linked the villages and towns. Travellers passed him by, and though Robin gave them all a fair good day and a straight gaze from his twinkling eyes, there was no sign of an adventure. No fat friar, his saddlebags clinking with coins taken from peasants and now being carried to a rich abbot. No villager with a tale of injustice. After a time, Robin turned away from the road and made his way towards the roofs of a village that was half hidden in the trees. Close to the village ran a brook crossed by a long, narrow plank which served as a bridge. As Robin approached the bridge, a man came striding towards it from the other side. When he saw Robin, he quickened his pace so that he might cross first. "By the saints," swore Robin, "what manner of man is this? More giant than man." Robin ran swiftly to the bridge, unslinging his bow as he ran. Setting foot on the plank, he placed an arrow to his bowstring and faced the stranger. The man advanced steadily to the centre of the bridge. He stood some 7 feet high, was broad-shouldered as a bull, his legs like the trunks of oak trees, his massive arms swollen with muscle, and the vast hands that gripped his stout staff were as huge as the haunches of prime venison. At the centre of the bridge he stopped, set his staff before him, and cried out his challenge. "Loose that shaft from your bow, and your head will ring like a church steeple a-jangle with bells from the kiss of my staff." "Long before your staff could reach me," cried Robin, "my arrow would have found your heart." The giant leaned forward on his stick. "You talk like the coward you are," he said. "A brave man who faces up so boldly to another, carrying only a staff." "I am no coward," cried Robin furiously. "Hold your place on the bridge while I cut myself a cudgel from the thicket, and then I'll knock the word coward about your teeth." Robin laid his bow and arrows on the ground and cut himself a strong staff. The stranger watched, his lips curving into a smile as he flexed his muscles and stretched his great arms. "Now," cried Robin, "whoever falls into the water first is the loser. The other has the victory." "Agreed with all my heart," smiled the giant, and he set his staff to await Robin's onslaught as a man awaits the attack of a gadfly. Robin ran at the stranger, and their staves clashed wood on wood, with the crash of red deer stags in the rutting season. Robin's bones were set jangling, and even the giant felt the blow shatter through him. "Take heed, little man," cried the stranger, raising his staff. "I shall crack your skull like a hazelnut." Light-footed, Robin danced before him, The staff crashed down, but ducking nimbly, Robin took only a glancing blow on the shoulder. Then he was through the giant's guard and set about his head with a fury of blows. The giant stumbled back, shaking his massive head like a stunned beast. Again Robin ran at him, but this time he was too slow and felt the giant's staff crack against his skull and blood trickle down his face. Undaunted, Robin leapt backwards on the narrow plank as the giant surged forward. Robin feinted with his staff, ducked beneath the stranger's guard for a second time, and closed in, his staff ringing about the head and shoulders of the giant. So fast and furious was the rain of blows that a sweat burst from the scarlet face of the stranger and rose in the air like steam. Holding his staff by one end, the stranger fixed his eyes on Robin and let out a murderous roar. He charged at Robin and dealt the outlaw such a batter upon his shoulders that he tipped him head over heels into the brook. "Faith," spluttered Robin, the fight is yours. You are a sturdy villain and no mistake." Finding his feet, Robin waded to the bank and sprang back onto dry land. He shook himself like a dog, then, taking his horn from his belt, he set it to his lips and blew a blast on it that sounded deep into Sherwood. The outlaws sped to answer their master's call, bursting through the trees and running towards the brook. "Why, you're wet to the skin," cried Will Stukely, staring in amazement at the state of his leader. "Did that rogue treat you so? Come, men, we will give him a ducking that he won't forget." Some dozen of the outlaws grabbed the giant to force him into the water. "No," cried Robin, "set him free. He's a sturdy fighter and won by virtue of his strength in a fair bout." As his men freed the stranger, Robin strode up to him, holding out his hand. "Friend," he said, "my name is Robin Hood, and these are my men, all good men and true. We live in the greenwood, harming no man save those whose fat needs the feel of our trimming knife. Come and join us. I need such a man as yourself to stand at my right side." "Aye, that I will," cried the giant. "Many times I have thought of joining you to fight with you on the side of the poor folk, and having met you, I like you the more. I shall join your band and fight right lustily for you." He grasped Robin's shoulder in his massive hand. "Robin Hood, I am your man." "You have become one of us," said Robin. "But what is your name?" "When this babe was born, they gave him the name of John," answered the giant. He paused, a wide grin splitting his great face. "That is my name, John Little." On hearing his last name, a roar of laughter rang out from the outlaws. "Then take this for your new name," said Robin. "I name you Little John." So the giant was known in Sherwood as Little John. He became the right-hand man of Robin Hood, and of all the outlaws he was the closest to his master, staying with him to the hour of Robin's death. Two things remained with Robin from his old life. One was the ache in his heart for his true love, Marion Mortimer. The other was his desire to be revenged on the abbot of St. Mary's for his greed. All Robin's men were charged to bring him word at once should the abbot of St. Mary's come near Sherwood. But the abbot knew that Robin of Loxley had been outlawed, and when tales reached him of a band of outlaws with their headquarters deep in Sherwood, he reasoned that their leader, Robin Hood, might well be the young Robin of Loxley. So the abbot, being of a shrewd and wary turn of mind, took pains to see that he kept well clear of the forest roads. So it was that Robin had lived 2 years in the greenwood before his chance for revenge came to him. One summer day, Robin was shooting at the marks, sending his arrows flying straight to their targets. Some 30 of his men stood around watching. Into the target ground ran Much, the miller's son. "What tidings?" demanded Robin. "You come like a bull at a gate." "He has come!" cried Much. "We have him at last!" Robin knew at once who he meant. "The abbot of St. Mary's?" he demanded. "Along the west road, with 100 of the sheriff's men, 50 marching before and 50 behind." 100 men, cried Robin gleefully. "What a prize the abbot must be carrying to need such an escort." Robin put his horn to his lips and set the greenwood ringing with 3 blasts, the call that would bring every outlaw straight to the great oak which grew at the very centre of their territory. He swung himself into the low branch of the huge tree and lifted up his hand for silence. "Men," he cried, "the abbot of St. Marie's rides into our forest. He comes with 100 of the sheriff's men to guard what he carries. Shall we ask him to dine with us?" The outlaws' yes came as if from one throat. "He rides along the west road. If he's to accept our invitation, we must persuade him to leave that broad road and take to a narrower path. Georgia Green, Wat Stummer, Grey Goss, Martin Low and Todd of the Fox's Skin, you shall all come with me. We shall bind up Wat's head and cover his face with deer's blood. Todd, we shall lay you on a litter, as if you were dead. George, you will dress as a peasant, while Martin, Grey Goss and myself will wear monk's robes. Together we shall come to meet the abbot. We shall tell him how we were set upon by villainous outlaws who brought us to this sorry state before we could convince them that we knew nothing of the man they sought, a certain abbot of St. Marie's. Then, when their bowels are water, we shall offer to lead them along a safe way through the forest. We shall take them along the ride that leads by the 5 Pines. You all know how it starts, a fine, broad way that dwindles into a mere track. And over the track, the branches of the trees meet like a roof, cried Little John. 5 times 100 men could lodge there unseen. Aye, agreed Robin, and every man of you shall be hidden in those trees when I bring the abbot beneath them. Little John, you shall lead the ambush. Choose your place with care. Do not go on until the track is too narrow, or they may smell a rat. Little John nodded, already planning the ambush. When I hear their approach, continued Robin, I shall blow twice upon my horn, so that you will be expecting us. It is well planned, shouted Much, and the outlaws roared their agreement. Good hunting, then, cheered Robin, swinging himself down from the oak. And a fat abbot for our prize, echoed Little John. In little more than 5 minutes, the space around the great oak where the outlaws had massed was completely empty. At the side of the west road, 6 men waited. The monk's hood was pulled well down over Robin's head. 3 other outlaws, also dressed in monk's robes, stood with him. One had his head swathed in blood-soaked bandages, and his face encrusted with drying blood. The 5th man was wearing the clothes of a poor peasant, while Todd lay on a litter on the ground, invisible under the 2 cloaks that were covering him. Suddenly Robin said, "Here they come," and he sent the notes of his horn ringing out into the forest. The waiting outlaws heard it and climbed into the branches of the trees that arched over the track. They were completely hidden by the thick screen of summer leaves. The sound of marching feet could now be heard clearly. "Pick up the boy," said Robin, "and what? See you grown your best. We must put on a pretty play for our Lord Abbot." Robin led the way down the road to meet the abbot. At his side came the battered monk, moaning in great distress and being supported by his brother monk. Behind them came the other monk and the peasant, carrying the litter on which Todd lay as still as if he were truly dead. The marching men came into sight, and in their midst, riding on a mule, was the abbot of St. Marie's. He was accompanied by 4 of his monks, also riding on mules, and each leading a pack-ass heavily laden with panniers. From the panniers came the telltale clink of gold. The abbot clutched his reins and looked about anxiously. Every bird that flew from a tree made him flinch nervously, and at the least sound he expected the forest blackness to become alive with bloodthirsty outlaws. Only the most dire necessity had forced the abbot into Sherwood. The gold in his saddlebags was bound for the royal court as a gift to King Henry. The abbot was to present the gold himself, at the same time mentioning, in the most delicate fashion, that should the king think fit to give the lands of Merton to the abbot, his gift would not be refused. A jay burst chattering from the bushes, and the abbot's heart jumped into his throat with fear. He drew a linen handkerchief from his sleeve and mopped his brow. At that moment, the men marching in front stopped, bringing the whole progress to a halt. "By the rood!" cried the abbot, straining to see what had caused the halt, his nerves thrumming. "Get on!" he shouted. "Get on with you!" He urged his mount towards the head of the column. The sight of the bleeding monk and the body on the litter, the abbot had to make a sudden grasp at his saddle as his head swam dizzily. "Brothers, what has befallen you?" he gulped. At this the injured monk groaned most horribly and leant even more heavily upon his companion. "Outlaws and cutthroats," cried the leading monk. "Only a mile back along the road they fell upon us like a pack of wolves, some 200 or more." The last drops of blood drained from the abbot's face, and his eyes stretched wide with fear. "Before we could convince them that we were not the men whom they were seeking, they had killed our lad and brought one of my brothers close to death, crying that they were the men of Robin Hood come to have their revenge." "What men were they seeking?" whispered the abbot through chattering teeth. "Why, a man of the church, like ourselves," replied Robin, "one who had wronged their master." "His name?" demanded the abbot in terror. "The abbot of St. Marie's," said Robin. On hearing his own name, the abbot swung dizzily in the saddle and would have swooned to the ground if two of the sheriff's men had not jumped to catch him. "You were turned back by a mere outlaw," scoffed the captain. "Near on 200, Robin corrected him. "Were I this abbot, I would not meet them with twice their number. They are mad for blood." "Have you turned back?" gasped the abbot. "Two of my brothers must take the boy for Christian burial," said Robin, "and Brother Anthony must have his wounds dressed, but I am bound for London." "Then you must face these brigands again?" said the abbot. "In no manner," cried Robin, as if in fear. "My man is from these parts, and knows of a way through the forest. We may take it safely, since the outlaws wait a mile back for their victim. It will add 3 hours to my journey, but were it to add 3 days, I would surely take it rather than face those fiends again." Robin waited, catching his breath to see if his carefully laid bait would be taken. The abbot hardly paused for a second. "We shall come with you," he said, brushing aside the captain's protest. "We are most grateful for this warning. Come, let us make all speed to leave this wretched place." "With your leave, I shall walk ahead with my man," said Robin. As you will," stuttered the abbot. "Only make haste." Robin walked a little way behind Georgia Green, as if he were following where he led. As the ride gradually grew narrower, Robin could hear the sheriff's men grumbling amongst themselves. The soldiers had been unwilling to turn off the road instead of facing up to the outlaws, and as the track narrowed, they began to look about suspiciously, saying to each other, "Who is this monk that leads us deeper into the forest?" One soldier, who knew Sherwood well, swore that he knew of no track that would take them through the forest. "Oh, little John," murmured Robin, "do not leave it too late." He glanced upwards, searching for signs of the outlaws. Then, in the dense shadows of the forest boughs, he caught a glimpse of a bold black eye that twinkled and winked, and Robin knew that they were walking under the ambush. With a great cry, the outlaws dropped from the trees plumb onto the men below. The fight was violent but short-lived, and in no time the sheriff's men were completely overpowered. Their hands lashed together, arrows pointing at their throats. They stood watching helplessly as Robin Hood, having thrown off his monk's robes, stood before the abbot clad in Lincoln green, his longbow in his hand. "How now, my good Lord Abbot," Robin cried. "1,000 welcomes to my new estates." The abbot's face was the colour of old porridge, and the huddle of monks standing beside him shook visibly. "When last we met, you were so fond of me that you moved into my house uninvited. But now set your mind at ease, for here you are invited, and to a right good feasting. You will see that my lands are somewhat broader than when I dwelt in Loxley. So come, make free here, as you did before." A peal of laughter from the outlaws greeted these remarks. Some of the outlaws stayed to guard the soldiers, while the rest went with Robin and led the blindfolded abbot and his monks through Sherwood until they came to the clearing by the vast oak where they dismounted. "Come, be seated," commanded Robin, guiding the abbot to his own oak tree chair and taking off his blindfold while the other monks were seated on logs. The rest of the outlaw band made themselves comfortable on the ground, and wooden platters were passed around and swiftly filled with thick slices of venison and pickled vegetables. Great jugs of ale were set within the reach of every man. "You're not eating," laughed Robin, looking down scornfully at the abbot's shaking hands. "Is our fare not good enough for you?" I'm not hungry," stuttered the abbot. "You had a fair enough appetite on our last meeting," Robin reminded him. "So fair an appetite that in one gulp you ate up my lands and house, horses and hounds, and all my means." "It was in the bond," whimpered the abbot. It was mine by law." "An eighth of my land would have more than met the bond," said Robin. "I was a green boy then, and you were so swinish in your holy greed that you would not wait 3 days, but took all that I had. You ate then of your own accord, so I say that you shall eat now, whether you would or no." The abbot felt the prick of Little John's dagger set against the fat at his waist. With shaking hands, he pushed the slices of meat into his mouth, trying desperately to swallow. "Drink," ordered Robin, passing him a tankard filled with water. "If this ale is thinner than you're used to, think on the wine you took from my father's cellars." The abbot sipped with trembling lips. While the others were feasting, 6 of the band had counted out the money in the little ass's panniers, and when they had finished, they brought the panniers and laid them at Robin's feet. £3,000, they told him. "So little!" cried Robin, starting up in mock dismay. "Why, my lord abbot, that will not pay for all you have eaten. We must take it all and ask for more." "Rogue and scoundrel!" spluttered the abbot, but the prick of Little John's dagger stopped his words. I have no more." "Why then," mocked Robin, "if you speak true, you must pay in some other manner. You shall dance for your supper. Dance, my lord abbot, dance as you once danced your way into my lands." From foot to foot the terrified abbot hopped. "Faster!" cried Robin, and set an arrow into the ground at the abbot's feet. "Ha! You have ginger in those toes that we have not seen yet." He shot again at the jogging abbot. This way and that he hopped and skipped, a desperate, pathetic figure, his eyes wide with terror, his arms loose as a puppet, his feet flapping hectically as he danced to the music of the outlaw's arrows. "Enough, enough!" cried Robin at last, wiping the tears of laughter from his eyes. "You have made good a little of your debt with such a merry jig, and what you have still to pay will keep until we meet again. Away with you." Little John brought up the abbot's mule, and 3 of the outlaws hoisted him into the saddle. "He's sitting the wrong way round," one of the men cried out. "Why, so he is," agreed Little John. "He's facing the beast's head." Girding the abbot's waist with one of his giant arms, Little John plucked him from the saddle and sat him down facing the mule's tail. So it was, facing his mule's rump, that the abbot of St. Marie's was led back to join the sheriff's soldiers. There was no laughter in the great hall of Nottingham Castle that evening. The Sheriff of Nottingham, that man of power and arrogance, sat late into the night, talking with his friend, the Abbot of St. Marie's. "We shall not tolerate it one day more," swore the Sheriff, crashing his fist down on the great elm table. "I shall ride to London myself to tell King Henry how our lives are made intolerable by this arrant knave." 10 days later, the Sheriff of Nottingham stood before King Henry in the courtroom of the Palace of Westminster. Light from the flaring torches made the jewelled rings on King Henry's fingers dusk and glint as he twisted his hands impatiently. His brows were drawn together, and his mouth set in a hard, ill-tempered line as the sheriff's voice droned on, relating tale after tale of Robin Hood's misdeeds. The sheriff told the king how the outlaws lived off the king's own deer, and were so secure in the heart of Sherwood that no forester dare go near them, was so full of guile that no honest man dare take the roads by the forest for fear of their arrows, and how the peasants who received gifts from the outlaws were beginning to question the right of the barons and the teachings of the church. "Why, only last month, this rebellious rogue waylaid the good abbot of St. Marie's," said the sheriff. "He took from him £3,000 that were being brought by the abbot as a gift to your majesty. And right scurrilously did that wretch treat the abbot, forcing him to eat your grace's venison and to dance frivolously, and tying him upon his mule face to tail." "Lives in my forest," cried King Henry, "dines off my venison, takes £3,000 meant for me, mocks the rule of the church, while you do nothing but come whining like a cur-dog snivelling at my feet. Are you not my sheriff? Are you not appointed to keep the rule of the king in Nottingham and Sherwood? Get you gone, and root out this rogue who flaunts our laws. Carry out the duties to which you are appointed, or your head will add a new bauble to the walls of Nottingham Castle." The sheriff rode back to Nottingham in high dudgeon, his sour blood boiling at the treatment he had received from the king. He knew that the men who were riding escort beside him had heard how he had been received by the king, and his mind shrivelled away from the thought of their tales being spread throughout Nottingham, growing taller with each retelling. When the sheriff reached Nottingham, he set about organising the capture of Robin Hood. He mustered his troops, and on a fine summer morning he rode into Sherwood with 200 men. A month later he rode out again, and in the whole month he had seen nothing more of the outlaw band than their arrows whistling through the trees. Sherwood was a village to the outlaws, but to the soldiers it was a place of terror, where every step might lead them into a swamp or an ambush, where every crackling twig might mean death from an outlaw's arrow. "Then you have not captured him?" asked Sir Hugh of Flamyards, when he sat drinking with the sheriff. "And how long did you spend in Sherwood?" "A month," admitted the sheriff sullenly, "but I shall capture him, and all who follow him." I doubt it not," soothed Sir Hugh. "But how? Do you plan to start a winter campaign? If you cannot master Sherwood in the summer, you will not survive the winter, nor would his majesty be pleased to wait so long for news of the outlaw's capture." The sheriff grunted, tipped back his goblet, drinking noisily, and held it out again to be refilled. As the page poured out the wine, a few drops spilt on the sheriff's sleeve. "Dolt!" he cried, hitting the boy soundly about the head. "Son of a cow!" He moved his goblet away too quickly, again causing the page to spill the wine and merit another clouting. "Then tell me," the sheriff demanded, thrusting his head out at Sir Hugh, "seeing you know so much, how you would take this Robin Hood." "I would sit here and wait for him to come to me," said Sir Hugh. "You would invite him to stay?" sneered the sheriff. "I would lure him," corrected Sir Hugh, smiling slowly. "I would hold an archery competition, as you have done before, and I would make the prize so valuable that no man who could draw a bow would be able to resist entering. Robin Hood would come running into your trap." The sheriff's face shone like an October full moon. "A prize of a golden arrow," he crowed. "That would bring him out of his hiding place." The evil laughter of the two men echoed in the page boy's ears as he stood silently behind the sheriff, listening to their plans to capture Robin Hood. It was Will Stukeley who brought the news of the contest to the outlaws. "All bowmen are challenged to the match, and the prize is to be an arrow of pure gold." "When is this contest?" Robin demanded. "A week come Saturday," said Will, "in the courtyard of Nottingham Castle. The arrow is to be presented by the sheriff himself." "You must not take such a risk," warned David of Doncaster. "Were the sheriff to see you, your next resting place would be Nottingham jail." "What would you have me do?" demanded Robin, turning on the young man. "Sit here sucking my thumbs while the sheriff presents the prize to another?" But many of the outlaws agreed with David of Doncaster. "You know well how he has tried to track you down," cautioned Georgia Green. "Would you walk into his grasp?" The frown on Robin's face deepened. He opened his mouth to tell his men that he had not known that they were such timid rabbits when there was a sound of running footsteps coming towards them through the trees. Suddenly Todd appeared, grasping another boy of about his own age tightly by the hand. Both boys were scarlet in the face and breathless. "Master!" cried Todd, halting in front of Robin. "I bring you news of great danger." He dragged his companion forward. "Speak," he commanded. "Tell Robin Hood what you told me when I found you." The boy looked up at Robin. His rich clothes were torn and spoiled, his fine leather shoes ruined. His face was filthy and beaded with dried blood where thorns and brambles had scratched him. "I was the page of the Sheriff of Nottingham," the lad announced in a clear voice, "but I am no longer in his service. I have come to serve you and to live the free life of the greenwood." "Your news," urged Todd in a breathless whisper. "Tell them your news, what you heard." "The shooting match for the Golden Arrow is not a true contest. While I was serving the sheriff, I heard him plan it all. It is a trap. He is only holding the contest to lure you to Nottingham. If you go, as he is sure you will be taken prisoner." The outlaws, who had already warned Robin not to go to Nottingham, redoubled their warnings. But Robin set his hands on his hips and laughed at them all. "A pox on your fears! I shall pluck this arrow from between the sheriff's teeth." "And the same teeth will close about your neck," said Will Stukely. But Little John, seeing that his master was set on the venture, and having a liking in his own heart for such a jest, described a plan which would allow Robin to compete for the arrow and remain unrecognised. The sun blazed down from a cloudless sky. In the tiers of seating overlooking the target set up for the archery contest, the noblemen and gentry of Nottingham sat dressed in silks, satins, and velvets. The sheriff, in his ermine-trimmed robes, sweated freely, but he paid no attention to the heat. He leant forward, staring down at the crowds beneath him, gnawing at the knuckles of his clenched fists. Separated from the crowds, the archers waited, testing bowstrings, taking practice aim. They were dressed more brightly than the common people, many wearing the livery of their masters. When the sheriff at last gave the order to allow the shooting to commence, there were still no archers in Lincoln Green waiting to shoot for the golden arrow, nor any who resembled any of the outlaws. "Search each face well," the sheriff warned his captain. As each archer stepped forward to shoot, the sheriff's men asked his name and where he came from, and while the man answered, they looked carefully at his features and dress. The crowd knew many of the archers. They cheered their favourites and jeered at those they disliked, but were always ready to encourage a brave shot, even if the archer was a stranger. "I think nothing of that one," stated a loud-voiced woman from the crowd, as a beggar, dressed in dirty rags, who was almost the last to shoot, stepped forward. "He were better to use his arrows to hold his rags together." The beggar limped towards the sheriff's men. One gripped him by the shoulder and hurried him forward. Stumbling, the beggar just managed to stop himself from falling. "Your name?" "Jack. I have no other." "Then, Jack, stir yourself to shoot before the devil collects his own." As the beggar set up his longbow and took aim, the sheriff's men watched complacently. "Even the bold Robin Hood, who they say turns none away, would not accept that bundle of tatters," said one. Laughing, the others agreed with him. But the beggar's arrow sang sweetly from his bow and buried itself into the target closer to the centre than any other arrow that had been shot before. The sheriff's men had no choice except to signal to the beggar to join the 12 archers whose arrows had also hit the inner ring of the target. When all had shot, there were only 13 archers to shoot again in the second round of the contest. This time they stood further back from the target, and only 5 survived. Included in these 5 was the beggar. Again the 5 shot from a greater distance, and only 2 hit the centre ring. These 2 were Sam of the Mill, one of the most skilled bowmen in the district, and the other was the beggar, still stumbling and clutching at his dirty rags. This time they stood back the full length from the target. The crowd, who knew the mean dealings of Sam of the Mill, were all cheering the unknown beggar. Many of the ladies clapped their dainty hands and vowed that if the beggar were not so old and filthy, he would be a fair yeoman. But one of the ladies sat very still, her brown eyes fixed on every move the beggar made. Her name was Marion Mortimer, and although she was slender, with a slight step and a good humour, she was still unwed. 2 years ago she had seen the last of her true love, Robin of Loxley, when he had been outlawed. Marion believed that he lived now in Sherwood using the name of Robin Hood, and often she would dream of joining him there. She had never looked at another man, yet today there was something about the beggar who was shooting so boldly that made her heart lift and brought colour to her cheeks. Sam of the Mill was to shoot first. The sheriff watched sullenly. This should have been his moment of triumph, for he had been certain that Robin Hood would win the arrow. The sheriff had rehearsed the moment over and over again in his mind. How, as he presented the golden arrow to Robin Hood, his men would surround him, and Robin would be in his power at last. Sam of the Mill took careful aim, checking his stance, the direction of the breeze, and making a great show of his own skill. His arrow flew true, coming so close to the very centre of the target that the crowd groaned, certain that Sam must have won. Stumbling, fumbling, almost tripping over his own bow, the beggar took his stand. He set his arrow to the bowstring, as if he knew little of the art. Then, with hardly a glance at the target, he drew back his bowstring, and as if by itself, the arrow took flight. A gasp rose from the crowd and turned into a roaring cheer, for the beggar's arrow lay buried in the target closer to the centre than the arrow which was already there, so close that from a distance they looked like one arrow. But the beggar's arrow lay on the inside and was at the very centre of the target. With bad grace, the sheriff presented the golden arrow to the beggar. "I had meant this for better than you," he said, "but he was too lily-livered to accept my challenge. He skulks like the coward he is, afraid to leave the safety of his forest." For a moment, the beggar looked directly at the sheriff, his hazel eyes alight with scorn and contempt. Then he took the arrow and buried it in his ragged clothing. Marion, who was still watching the beggar, thought for a wild instant that it really was her lost love. For a split second, the beggar looked straight at her. Their eyes met, and Marion knew that it was Robin of Loxley in disguise. His name formed on her lips, but before she could speak, he had turned away and was lost in the throng. It was Robin, she told herself. And he knew me, but he thinks of me only as a weak, silly girl who would be a burden round his neck. "What ails you?" asked her mother sharply. "Has the sun touched you too strongly?" But Marion hardly heard her, for the sudden resolve that had formed in her mind, the resolve to learn to shoot an arrow as truly as Robin himself, and to handle a sword as well as any man. Then she would be a fit mate for Robin Hood. As Robin jostled his way through the crowds, he saw nothing but the vision in his mind's eye of Marion, her auburn curls, her gentle brown eyes, and her slim grace. "She could not possibly have recognized me," he lied to himself. "Never could I take her from her family and home, or ask her to endure the hardships of life in Sherwood. I have no right even to think of her. She would not marry an outlaw." Resolutely, Robin barred all thoughts of Marion from his mind. Later that night, the golden arrow hung from a single thread, spinning like a weather vane from a branch of the great oak at the heart of Sherwood. Robin sat at the foot of the oak, ale jug in his hand, the rags of his disguise flung behind him, still jubilant from his success. "Yet one thing vexes me," he said, staring up at the glinting arrow. "I like it little that the sheriff should think me a coward." "Oh, that is easily put to rights," said Little John. "Tomorrow he will think that no longer." The next day, when the sheriff rode to worship, an arrow buried itself into the leather of his horse's saddle. His men drew their swords, but there was no sign of anyone who could have fired it. "There's a message on it," said the soldier who had plucked the arrow from the saddle. The sheriff snatched the piece of paper that was pierced on the arrow. It read, "Yon beggar was none but bold Robin Hood, and your arrow hangs now from his oak in Sherwood." At a high window, Little John was filled with silent laughter to see the sheriff's rage, and by that evening the whole of Nottingham knew how Robin Hood had tricked the sheriff in his own city. Autumn burnished the forest to red gold. Early frosts rimed the grasses and rusted the bracken. The air was sharp and the sky silver blue. In a clearing, Robin Hood and Little John were practising their skills with the broadsword. Since their first meeting on the plank, the two had crossed swords and staves many times, and each knew all the tricks of the other. They moved now fast, now slow, giving and receiving blows of such power that they would have dropped any other man to the ground. Little John's blade struck down upon his master's left shoulder, crashing against the chainmail he was wearing for protection. Robin sidestepped, letting the sword blade slide down his back, while with both hands on the hilt of his sword he hit Little John a punishing blow beneath his right arm, crashing into the giant's armour. A cheer rose from the watching men, and the bright-eyed lads, sitting like squirrels in the branches of the trees, could not speak for excitement. "Enough, enough!" cried Robin, as Little John struggled to his feet and made a Robin again. "We will fight another time. Were I to take the fastest horse in all Nottinghamshire and ride 10 days in any direction, I would not find a better swordsman than yourself, Little John." "Not so," said Will Stukely. "Only 10 miles from this very spot there lives a swordsman second to none. He would make mincemeat of Little John, and I would not lay a wager between yourself and this man." "What name has this fellow?" cried Robin. He is the curtail friar of Fountainhead Abbey, or Friar Tuck, as he is known. At first, when Little John had heard Will Stukely's words, his face had bloomed scarlet with rage. But when he heard who it was that Will Stukely meant, his expression mellowed. "Aye," he said, his eyes flickering with memories, "I have met the man. He did not make mincemeat of me, though if any should manage it, he would be the one." Robin's curiosity burned like flame in dry tinder. "Tell me more of this wonder man," he demanded. "He lives in a small stone dwelling outside the walls of Fountainhead," said Will Stukely. "He is ever ready to give a blessing or a shriving, and being himself no small part of Mother Church, he rightly uses the alms people pay him to support himself. Should there be no offering and the passer-by rich, why, well, Tuck's sword will slit their money-bags and send their coins jingling into his hands." "Such a one," cried Robin, "speaks to my heart. He should not be left to waste there. His place is here in Sherwood Forest at our side. I shall search out this Friar Tuck." Will Stukely led the way to Fountainhead Abbey. Little John, curious to see his old rival again, and 4 more of the outlaws, looking for a day's adventure, came with them. "There," said Will Stukely at length, when the forest path they had been following opened out to green pastures that sloped down to a fast-flowing river. "There is Fountainhead." He pointed across the river to where the roofs of the abbey could be seen through the trees. "Wait here," Robin told his men. "I have a mind to meet this famous friar by myself." "Take your wits with you, then," warned Will Stukely. "He's a cunning rogue." "I have my horn," said Robin. "One blast will bring 6 brave men to aid my wits." And he walked on alone down towards the river. The outlaws turned back into the trees and stretched themselves out under the warmth of an autumn sun. Robin followed the rolling, peat-brown river, searching for a bridge or a ford where he might cross over. His heart was light within him at the thought of finding a man to join his band, such as this Friar Tuck promised to be. Soon Robin reached a place where the river flowed more slowly. He took a stick, and testing the depth of the water, knew that it would reach over his thighs if he waded across. Having no wish for such a wetting, he looked around, but could see no other way of crossing. It seemed if he was to find Friar Tuck, he must risk a soaking. At that moment, he saw a figure sitting on the opposite bank. He was half hidden by a knot of willow trees, but Robin could see that he wore a friar's habit. His head was tonsured, with a shaved crown and a halo of black curls. His face was round as a whole cheese, round as the pie which he was cramming into the huge cavern of his mouth. Beneath his friar's robes, which were kirtled into a cord at his waist, 2 solid legs planted enormous bare feet into the soft earth at the riverside, and the hand that felt for the second pie to follow the first down his gaping maw cast a thunderous shadow over the ground. "Why," thought Robin, "here's a sturdy horse to take me across the river." Fitting an arrow to the string of his bow, he aimed it straight at the heart of the fat friar. "Brother Friar," he called, "do you wait there to act as a ferryman? For I would cross your river, and as you have no boat that I can see, I needs must ride upon your back." Slowly and deliberately, the friar packed the last piece of pie into his mouth, dusted the crumbs off his lips, and slowly wiped his hands on the hem of his gown. Then he stood up. His eyes peered out of his fat face like twin currants stuck into risen dough, but they regarded Robin shrewdly enough. "Since I wear the medal of our blessed St. Christopher, you may put down your bow. I shall come for you and carry you across." With these words, the friar belted up his gown, buckled on the broadsword that even Little John would have been hard-pressed to wield, set his steel cap upon his shaven head, and strode into the river. The flowing water split before him as if an island were on the march. When he reached the opposite bank, he bent his broad back, and without a word, Robin climbed onto his shoulders, and, sitting high and dry, was carried to the other side. On the far bank, the friar deposited Robin on the ground, and quick as a wink had drawn his sword and held it over Robin's head. "Now," cried the friar, "let me see you return my Christian charity. It would please me to be carried to the other side." When Robin opened his mouth to object, he felt the stab of the friar's sword. "Step fair," commanded the friar, balancing himself on Robin's shoulders like a fully-blown blossom on a slender stem. The friar was some 3 times the weight of Robin, nor did Robin's feet know the crossing as the friar had done. Each time Robin hesitated or stumbled, the friar dug his heels into his sides or tweaked his ears to guide him to left or right. This time, when they reached the bank, Robin was the faster. He pretended to stumble, lobbed his rider onto the bank, and in one sure spring was kneeling beside him, his dagger tickling the friar's fat chins. "Since we are now back where I started from, we shall need to begin again, and this time it will be my turn to ride." "Never a word," said the friar. It was not until they had reached the middle of the river that he lowered his head, hunched his shoulders, and then, giving a mighty heave, chucked Robin head first into the water. Before Robin, spluttering and gasping, had found his feet, the friar was on dry land drawing his sword. Robin clambered up onto the bank, drawing his own sword, and the 2 men charged at each other with the clash of steel on steel. At first, Robin fought blindly, so furious was he at all the humiliations which had been heaped upon him. There was not one of the outlaws who could have withstood the fury of Robin's sword when his blood surged high with fury. But the friar was agile and quick-witted, and drove his sword blows with the charge of a full-grown bull behind them, easily containing Robin's whirlwind attack. Gradually, Robin's temper cooled, and he began to fight with his usual skill and tactics. Yet so evenly matched were the 2 men that they fought for nearly 4 hours, first one taking the advantage and then the other. Robin's left arm bled where the friar had wounded him, and round one of the friar's assembly of chins was a dripping necklace of blood. Both men were blinded by their own sweat. The weight of their chainmail, unnoticed before, now hung on their bones like lead. The muscles of their sword arms burnt in agony. Then, as Robin came forward in a renewed attack, the friar stumbled. In falling, he caught at Robin's shoulder, and both men sank to their knees. For a second, neither spoke. Then, wiping the sweat out of his eyes, Robin cried to the friar to give him permission to blow his horn. "Gladly," agreed the friar, "if you give me leave to whistle when I will." "Granted," said Robin, and sent the note of his horn singing over the river. In minutes the 6 outlaws came into sight, running full speed to their master's aid. "My men," said Robin gleefully. The friar took one glance at the running figures, set his fingers to his lips, and blew through them in a loud whistle. "My dogs," he said, as from the direction of the abbey came a pack of cur-dogs. There were some 10 or 12 animals, all powerful as mastiffs. Some had smooth coats, some shaggy, but all with jaws like man-traps and eyes intent on their master's enemies on the other side of the river. Little John, seeing 2 of the great dogs leaping up at Robin, jaws slavering, came charging across the river, his broadsword held aloft. Yet when he reached his master's side, a roar of laughter burst out of him, and he grasped the friar by the waist and swung him off his feet. "Whistle your brutes off," he cried. "Would you attack your friends? Even the gross and turgid Tuck would not stoop so low." "John Little!" cried the friar, and setting his fingers to his lips, he whistled until all his dogs had returned to him and were frothing round his heels like so many sheep. "You have met my good master, Robin Hood," said Little John. "Indeed," said Friar Tuck, looking ruefully around at the trampled reeds and muddied ground. "If I had but known who he was, I could have spared myself his necklace." His fat fingers touched the wound at his neck. "And had I but known who you were," said Robin, grasping Friar Tuck by the shoulder and hand, "I had not given it to you. I set out this morning with only one thought in my head, to find the great swordsman Friar Tuck and bring him home to Sherwood." The friar's bead-black eyes twinkled with merriment, and he smacked his fat lips together in amazement. "This morning," he said, "I had fully intended to take myself and my hounds to Sherwood. Winter comes on apace, a lonely time for a solitary man. When I had down that last pie, had I not been called upon to carry a certain rogue across the river, I would have been on my way to Sherwood to search you out." "Come with us now," said Robin. "Be my man." "That I will. To share your fire, an ale-mug, and a good tale will set the winter by its heels. I'll come." So they set off back to Sherwood, Robin, Friar Tuck and Will Stukely walked together, the hounds ranging before and behind them, while the other outlaws listened to Little John's tales of Friar Tuck's reputation as a storyteller, and his appetite for venison pasties and game pies. Soon they were swallowed up by the early evening shadows, lying like pools of dark velvet under the golden trees. Tam Barley was the outlaw in charge of the band's money, and in late October he came to Robin with a coffer that was half empty and a sorry tale to tell. "There was new cloth for our winter clothes," listed Tam, "grain for flour, the village of East Rye sore pressed by that villainous Baron the Duke Legrand, each household to receive a silver coin by your command." Robin nodded his approval as Tam continued his list: leather and pots, salt and spices, physic and arrowheads. "None wasted, master," declared Tam. "I keep as close a watch upon this money as if it were my own." "Perhaps it is time we had a few more guests to dine with us," suggested Little John, and Will Stukely grinned his agreement. All who dined under the great oak were asked to pay for the privilege. Many a poor peasant paid no more than a feather or a pebble he had in his pocket, but the rich travelled on their way having left their money-bags in Tam's good keeping. Robin's face brightened, and turning to his companions he said, "Shall we invite the Sheriff of Nottingham to dine with us?" "Aye," said Little John. "Go and knock him up and bid him attend our feast and bring his gold with him." "Oh, he will surely come," agreed Will Stukely, "running to set his gold at our feet." Robin Hood sprang up. "The sheriff will come," he promised, "and this very day. Prepare a feast for him, and he will come riding at my side, bringing his gold with him as a gift." On hearing Robin's words, the three men threw back their heads and roared with laughter. Other outlaws, hearing their laughter, came over to find out what it was about, and soon some 50 of the band had gathered around, telling each other that Robin was to bring the Sheriff of Nottingham to dine with them that very afternoon. "What, Will Poor and Ham Docken," said Robin, "see to it that the deer herd freely about our camp. I should not like to bring the sheriff here and have him think that our larder is empty." The young men Robin had named looked at each other in surprise. "We shall bring the deer from the whole of Sherwood," they promised. "But tell us why." "By this afternoon you shall know," said Robin, as he turned to leave his men. "Master," called Little John, springing up to be at Robin's side, "I see you are taken by some harebrained scheme, but do not go alone. Take me and some others with you." "By no means," said Robin. "I go to Nottingham to invite the sheriff to dine, and the sight of such a mountain as yourself moving at my side would drive his few wits from him, and he might forget to bring his gold. But I shall take Todd with me, if he promises not to scare the sheriff." Then Robin went off to dress himself in the finest clothes he could find, in the hut where the outlaws kept their disguises. Although it was still very early morning, the road leading to Nottingham was astir with folk, for today, as Robin knew, was market day in that city. Robin and Todd sat down to wait by the roadside, in the shelter of a clump of bushes. It was almost an hour before Robin saw the pony and cart, for which he was waiting, come trotting towards him at a brisk pace. "Blithe morning, Jem Ross," cried Robin, stepping out from his cover. "Why, master," exclaimed the man who was driving the cart, "what brings you here?" He drew rein at Robin's side. "Your pony is lame," said Robin. "Bring her in from the road until we check her foot for bruises." "Aye, she's been lame since we left home," said Jem Ross, winking, and he allowed Robin to lead his pony and cart into the shelter of the trees where they were hidden from the road. Jem Ross was a butcher, and his cart was full of meat bound for Nottingham market. Last winter the sheriff had taken Jem's younger brother prisoner, and had it not been for the outlaw's money, he would have been a prisoner still. "How can I help?" Jem asked. "I have a mind to play butcher for a day," said Robin. "Will you lend me your pony and cart?" "Gladly," said Jem, jumping down and handing his reins to Robin. "Wait here," Robin told the butcher. "Before night, Todd will bring your cart back to you, and tomorrow one of my men will bring you payment for your meat." Jem nodded, wondering to himself what plan Robin had in his head, but he only said, "Good luck to you," as Robin drove off. Robin Hood and Todd reached the market and found themselves a place amongst all the other butchers. The butchers looked suspiciously at Robin and his fine clothes, knowing he was a stranger whom they had not seen before. Robin stood by his cart, shouting his wares in a loud, clear voice, and as the other butchers listened, their suspicions changed to hostility, for Robin was selling his meat at less than a quarter of the market price. Soon Robin's cart was crowded round with housewives. Two of the other butchers elbowed their way through the crowd. "What lunatic are you to come to market to give your meat away?" one of them demanded. "Charge a fair price," the other snarled, "or the dogs will have your meat when we have kicked over your cart." "Fie," said Robin in mock alarm. "Let the dogs have the wretched stuff." He picked up a leg of lamb between finger and thumb and threw it to a cur-dog who was sniffing amongst the carts. "'Tis none of my choosing that I'm here. Did I ask my uncle to die and leave me his filthy meat?" He snatched a handkerchief from his sleeve and held it delicately to his nostrils. "Pray do not vex yourselves. After today you shall not see me here again," he continued, and went on giving away his meat for next to nothing. The sheriff, riding through the marketplace, noticed the crowds about Robin's cart and sent two of his men to investigate. "Some prodigal with more money than sense," reported the sheriff's man. "He has fallen heir to his uncle's butchery, considers it beneath him, and is giving the meat away to be rid of it." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Bring him here," he ordered. "Why, right gladly," said Robin, when he was told that the sheriff wanted to speak with him. Telling Todd to look after the pony and the cart, he minced his way to the sheriff. When he reached the sheriff, Robin swept him a low bow, lavishly twirling his feathered hat through the air in wide circles. "Give me your name and your business," the sheriff cried. "Explain yourself." "You see before you," cried Robin, pulling the wide brim of his hat well down over his face, "a hapless man. What has my uncle chosen to do but die, and saddle me with his wretched meat and pastures full of horned beasts all on the hoof? I ask you, what shall I do? Gladly would I give those beasts away, if I could find someone generous enough to take them." "How many head?" asked the sheriff greedily. "Why, half the number of horns," cried Robin. "Lack, sir, I have more to do than count the creatures, though my uncle's will states there are more than 300. "Would you sell?" asked the sheriff, bending down over his horse's shoulder. "For 400 pounds I would sell the land they graze on as well," Robin assured him. "I promise you, sir, I am in desperation to be rid of them." "Let us discuss it further," said the sheriff, looking hastily over his shoulder in case anyone should have overheard this fool offering to sell land and cattle at a fraction of their value. Over the sheriff's best Malmsey wine, they discussed the deal. "I must be rid of the beast tonight," said Robin, "for tomorrow I set out back to London. If you would buy them, you must ride with me now to see them, bringing your money with you. If this is too sudden, I must find another kind soul to take them from me, for I swear I shall not stay another day in this sodden backwater." "Stay, stay," cried the sheriff. "The deal is settled between us. I shall ride with you this hour." "And the price?" asked Robin. "In my men's saddlebags," said the sheriff. So it was that while Todd drove the pony and cart back to their owner, Robin, mounted on the sheriff's second-best horse, followed by two of the sheriff's men, their saddlebags clinking with gold, led the sheriff straight into Sherwood. "Had you warned me that your uncle's lands lay in this direction, I would have brought more men with me," said the sheriff, looking about as they rode closer to Sherwood. "Being a stranger to these parts, you will not have heard of Robin Hood and his gang of cutthroats who make our lives a torment." "I have heard of him," said Robin. "It surprises me little," said the sheriff. "The misdeeds of such a villain are bound to be common gossip, even in London. This is the very forest where his band has their hiding-place." The sheriff urged his men to keep a good lookout for any sign of outlaws. "You are sure this is the way to your uncle's cattle?" he demanded nervously, when Robin turned his horse to follow a track winding between the trees. "Quite certain," laughed Robin. "In a little while you will see more horned beasts than you had dreamed possible." The sheriff felt a sudden icy shiver creep over his scalp and up his spine. In a second, everything about his companion seemed to have changed. He had lost his foppish, uncertain air. Before, he had sat his horse as if more than half afraid of it. Now he sat boldly in the saddle, his hands firm on the reins, looking about him in a commanding fashion. Almost, thought the sheriff, as if he were a lord coming back to his estates. At this thought, the sheriff's blood froze in his veins and his teeth chattered with fear, for it was a kingdom into which he was being led. It was Robin Hood's kingdom of Sherwood. Robin, realizing that the sheriff had at last seen through his disguise, laughed aloud in the sheriff's face. "Look," he cried, "here they come, the horned beasts you are here to see." Through an opening in the trees passed a great herding of deer, and the forest was suddenly alive with men. "As I promised," cried Robin, "I have brought the sheriff to dine with us. Come, lead us to the feast." But it was only Robin and his men who feasted. The sheriff and his men sat tight and frozen with fear, expecting every moment to feel an arrow in their backs or hear a knife drawn from its sheath to slit their throats. "Though I fear our feast has not been to your liking," said Robin at last, "it is a rule of this place that you must pay. Men, how much has our guest to offer us?" The two outlaws, who had been counting out the gold from the saddlebags, brought it before Robin. £400, they told him. Robin signalled to his men to take the money away. The sheriff and his men remounted their horses, were blindfolded, as they had been when they were brought to the oak, and were led away. "Visit us again," called Robin. "You are always welcome." The outlaw's mocking laughter rang in the sheriff's ears as he was led hither and thither before his blindfold was removed, and with a great shout and waving of arms, the outlaws, who had been leading their horses, startled the animals into a runaway gallop through the forest. All the road back to Nottingham, the sheriff said not one word, but the resolve hardened in his black heart to kill Robin Hood by any means, fair or foul. Several months had passed since the sheriff's visit, and Robin Hood and Little John were out one morning shooting deer for the outlaw's store pantry. "What ails you, master?" demanded Little John, with ill-concealed irritation. For the second time that morning, Robin had missed a buck that had been an easy target. "For a week now you have been as dull as a November midday," Little John said grumpily. "We have had company enough, 2 Norman barons who gave us a song and a gay dance, and those foresters whom we led a merry chase, leaving them in Daunton's marsh to find their own way out of it. And is not that a bold tale which Friar Tuck is telling us of King Arthur and his knights? To make a shrewd guess at your complaint, I would say your trouble is in your heart, and to give it a name, why, I would choose the name Marion." "Aye," agreed Robin, "you would be right. Oh, I have only glimpsed her once since I came to the greenwood, yet she is as close to my heart as ever she was." He stared dolefully into space. "Then go and find her and bring her to Sherwood," said Little John. Robin shook his head. "What have I to offer her? How could I ask her to marry me now? In the old days I was Robin of Loxley, and now I'm nothing but a common outlaw." "Common outlaw you are not," said Little John. "Were King Richard to return from the Crusades, all would change. His lily-livered younger brother plots only to steal the kingdom while Richard is fighting the Holy War. We do no wrong when we take from the corrupt church and grasping barons to give to the common people. Give Marion the chance to choose for herself. From what you have told me of her, she loves you truly." As if Little John's words had filled him with new resolution, Robin stood up, grasped his staff in his hand, slung his bow and arrows on his back, and turned to face Little John. "You speak well," he said. "If Marion be the maid I knew, she will come to Sherwood. I have been mad to doubt her." As Robin disappeared from sight between the trees, Little John wished him good luck. Marion was the daughter of a wealthy merchant, Thomas Mortimer. When Robin had lived at Loxley Hall, Marion had lived some 10 miles distant in a large stone house known as the Willow Winds, named for the river that ran through its grounds. Many times Marion and Robin had wandered together on the river bank under the dappled sun and shade of the willows, and shared lazy summer days, watching for the flash of a kingfisher's wing or the flickering silver of trout seen in the shallows. As Robin strode through the forest, memories of those carefree days came back to him, and he realized how much he must have changed during the years he had spent in Sherwood. A reluctance, a kind of shyness came over him. She will see me as a wild man of the woods, he thought, and changing his direction, he decided to go first to Loxley Hall, which he had not seen since the abbot had driven him from his home. As he walked slowly up the long drive to Loxley Hall, each step brought back memories of his childhood. Whoever it is that the abbot has installed in my rightful place takes scant care of the grounds, Robin thought, or of the house, he added, as a turn in the drive brought Loxley Hall into full view. Overgrown bushes, rank grass and weeds surrounded the hall, whose roofs and doors cried out for the care of a loving craftsman. Robin pulled his hood further down over his face, intending to knock on the door of Loxley Hall and ask for bread and a draught of water. But before he could reach the door, a thick-set, low-browed man came running from one of the outbuildings, waving a stick at Robin and shouting at him to be off. "A drink from your well, good master," said Robin. "That is all I ask." "We give no alms here. Get you gone, or the dogs will see to it that your throat needs no more water." "If you refuse me water," said Robin, "at least tell me the name of your master." "And what is that to you?" the man said, coming closer to Robin, trying to see the face hidden in the shadow of the hood. "What is it you want here? You look to me like a right saucy knave." The man's hand shot out, pulling the hood from Robin's head. Before he fully realized what he was doing, Robin had fitted an arrow to his bow and aimed it at the man's heart. "Do not make a habit of tweaking off hoods when you do not know what you will find beneath them," he said. The man, now a quivering slob of fear, had fallen on his knees before Robin. I meant no harm," he whimpered. "Put aside your bow. I am but my master's servant. It is on his orders that I let no one near the house. I must refuse all requests for alms, drive all away." "Who is this generous master of yours?" asked Robin. "The land belongs to the abbot of St. Marie's, but my master, who only stays here when he is not travelling about on his business, is Guy of Gisborne." At this name, a cold sweat burst out of Robin. A loathing of disgust and shame blackened his mind. His hand shook, and his bow almost dropped to the ground. He turned swiftly away from the man kneeling in front of him, and pulled his hood back over his head as he strode away from Loxley Hall. His first feelings of shock changed to a blinding rage that such a creature as Guy of Gisborne should be living at his former home. Guy of Gisborne was known throughout the land as a most foul murderer. His skill with the longbow and broadsword almost equals Robin's own, and there was nothing that he would not do for gold. He would kill woman or child in cold blood, track down a victim to France or the Netherlands until one of his black arrows winged his back. It was well known that both noblemen and clergy employed Guy of Gisborne to carry out their baser desires. So enraged was Robin that he did not hear the muted sounds that followed him down the drive. He did not look back to see the servant watching, half hidden in the gateway, to make sure that Robin was going in the direction of Loxley, before he took to his heels over the fields to Loxley village, making straight for the inn where a number of the king's foresters were usually to be found. Robin trudged through the village, all his thoughts turned inward on his own misfortunes, seeing nothing of the villagers who turned to stare at the hooded stranger. Only once did he look up out of himself to see a young lad coming along the road towards him. He was riding a bay pony that trotted along at the dusty side of the road. The lad had sun-tanned skin and brown eyes. His hands on the reins were as light as a maid's. When he rode past, there was a brightness about him that pierced even Robin's gloom. Robin had barely lost sight of the last of the cottagers when his sixth sense told him that something was wrong. He looked around sharply and saw behind the clump of wayside bushes that he had just passed the glint of steel caught by the sun. Just in front of him grew 2 ancient beech trees, one on either side of the track. A quick glance upwards showed Robin about 6 foresters, partly hidden in the lower branches of the trees. There was the imitation of a bird's call, almost drowned by the sound of Robin's horn calling to any outlaws within earshot to come to his aid. "There he is!" cried the triumphant voice of the servant from Loxley Hall. "It's him, Robin Hood!" Almost before Robin had time to draw his sword, he was surrounded on all sides by foresters. Robin's sword struck and drove like a living thing. 2 of the foresters dropped wounded at Robin's feet, and for several minutes they served as a barrier holding back the more timorous souls. Robin danced light on his toes, knowing now that his only chance of survival lay in his ability to keep moving. He felt blood running past his right eye, and knew from the pain that he had also been wounded in the arm, yet hardly felt it. There was only the searing, hectic dance of the surviving moment. Moments that somehow joined together into a chain, link by link. Robin knew that he was fighting for time to give the outlaws the opportunity to come to his aid. A swarthy, pock-faced man came up close to Robin, his lips drawn back from yellow teeth, his sword flashing. At the same time, Robin was struck by a blow from behind and felt pain spread beneath his shoulder blades. He knew that if his men did not come soon, he could not hold out any longer. Again the swarthy forester struck with a shrewd blow. Robin took it on his sword, but fell to his knee with the shock of it. At once 3 foresters were on top of him, but Robin battled to his feet again, shaking himself free as if the men were terriers clinging to a bull. Yet Robin knew that his strength was failing, and he listened desperately for any sound that might signal the approach of his men. He heard the hooves of a pony being galloped flat out along the road. For a second he glanced away from the fight and saw the lad who had passed earlier bearing down on the foresters with a drawn sword in his hand. He was leaning from the saddle to swing his sword at heads and faces as he passed, only to turn his pony round in a rearing halt and ride to the attack again and again. Robin went at the foresters with renewed fury, and then, from the trees, 10 outlaws came racing, and the foresters took to their heels, carrying their wounded with them. A rain of arrows from the outlaws' bows followed them down the road. They took me in ambush," admitted Robin, looking shamefacedly at his men, "and would have had me prisoner but for your coming and the aid of this young man." The lad had dismounted and was leaning over his pony's neck. As Robin turned to thank him and ask his name, the youth slumped to the ground in a dead faint. "He's wounded!" cried Robin, and ran to the lad. He crouched down, cradling him in his arms. The hat the boy had been wearing fell from his head, and auburn curls cascaded down his back. "Marion!" cried Robin, and could not say another word for the tightness in his throat. Marion's eyes opened. "Are you hurt?" cried Robin. "Not one scratch," she assured him. "If I fainted, it was for joy, not wounds. Joy that I have found you again." "But how is it that you are here?" Robin asked, as Marion lay sweetly in the crook of his arm. "I had come to find you. I passed you on the road earlier, but I wasn't sure it was you. I turned back to find out if it was truly you. I have taught myself to use bow and sword as well as any man. I've come to prove to you that I am fit to live in Sherwood. And I set out today to find you, bring you to Sherwood as my bride," said Robin. Just 1 week later, Friar Tuck married them in a brave ceremony beneath the great oak, and the outlaws, all in Lincoln Green, raised a mighty roar to cheer Robin Hood and his maid Marion. Rain slanted from a heavy sky, and the ground was mire underfoot. It was early morning, but no birds sang, and no small animals scuttled through the undergrowth. Robin walked slowly through the forest. He turned from the path and made his way through the bushes and dense undergrowth. Almost any other man would have found it impossible to pass where Robin went, but his years in Sherwood had taught him how to move through the forest as if he were a fox or a shadow. Treading silently, he came to a small copse of hazel bushes. In autumn, it was a favourite place for the boys of the camp to come nutting. Looking round the bushes, Robin saw that the nuts had already grown round and brown, and he knew it for one more sign that summer was drawing to a close. He plucked 3 of the nuts, cracking them between his teeth, and they were sweet to his taste. For a moment, he cradled the split shells in the palm of his hand, and then tossed them to the ground. Where they fell, the body of a young boy lay in the long grass. A black arrow, flighted with black feathers, stuck out from his back. The lad was wearing Lincoln green, soaked to a darker shade by the rain, and stained with blood. Robin knelt swiftly beside him, but he was cold and stiff with death. "Dickon, the sheriff's page," said Robin, letting the boy's face sink back into the grass. "God rest you." Blowing his horn, Robin summoned his men. "Shot in the back," cried Will Stukely. "A swine to shoot thus, and at an unarmed lad." "Take him and bid Friar Tuck give him a Christian burial," said Robin. "I shall go on until I find the man who loosed such a coward's arrow." "They say that Guy of Gisborne shoots such black arrows," said one of the outlaws. "They are the mark of his trade. I have seen them before." "Do not go alone, Robin," pleaded Will Stukely. "Take at least 4 men with you." "I go alone," said Robin, turning away from them. "Let no man follow me." When Robin left his men, he followed the trail of the man who had shot the page without any difficulty. No attempt had been made to hide the tracks, and to Robin's eye they were as clear as the road to market. He came to a glade surrounded by birches and hazels. All his instincts told him that he was close to his quarry. He stopped, still hidden by the trees, and looked out into the clearing, and the sight he saw there froze his very heart's blood. "Now Our Lady and all saints protect me," he whispered, crossing himself. In front of him stood the shape of a man clad from head to foot in the hide of a horse. Mane, tail, and ears remained in place. The skin from the head formed a cowl that hid the wearer's face. The hide gleamed in the downpour, but Robin could see that the skin had been cured and tanned, and was now like plate armour, protecting the wearer. The man moved, and Robin saw that his quiver was full of black arrows. Without hesitating, Robin strode into the clearing. "Good day," he said, "although I know not whether I speak to man or beast." The man swung round to face Robin, one hand closing on the hilt of his sword. He pushed back the cowl from his head and revealed a face as evil and dark-visaged as any that Robin had seen in all his days. Black eyebrows sprouted in a single bar above his pale jackdaw eyes, his nose curved like a hawk's beak, and his mouth was a tight, lipless line. "Take care how you speak," the man snarled, "or your tongue will be a little red fish in the grass. Give me your name." "My name is of no matter," said Robin. "I live in the forest, minding the king's deer." "Being of the forest, you will know of this Robin Hood," said the stranger. "Aye," Robin answered. "Tell me what you know of him." "They say he shoots a straighter arrow than any in England, and few can hold their own against him with a sword." Jeering, mirthless laughter poured from the horse-skin. "You speak to one who can. I am Guy of Gisborne, and I care not who knows it. Shudder and grow pale. You will not be the first to shrink from my name." "If I shudder," said Robin, "it is not from fear, but from disgust that so fair a place as Sherwood should be darkened by the sound of that name." "It is a name to make weaklings tremble. The sheriff holds it in such high esteem that he has promised me any boon I crave when I have killed this Robin Hood. Already I have taken a treacherous page-boy who deserted his master to play at outlaws." At the thought of the boy shot in the back, Robin grew cold with a terrible rage. "What a bold man it must take to kill a boy," he said slowly. "There is not anyone living whom I would not slay for gold,"
said the stranger, "nor any place throughout the length and breadth of England that has not felt the death-blow of my sword or the blood-letting of my arrows." And with these words, Guy of Gisborne drew his sword, and, with his eyes glaring through the empty eye-sockets of his horsehead cowl, he fell upon Robin. "Black-hearted villain," cried Robin, taking the crash of Guy of Gisborne's sword on his own blade, "know that you have met your match. Dance now to the metal of the sword of Robin Hood." Through the grey, impersonal rain the two men fought, giving and taking blow for blow. Each knew that the other was set to kill, and that whichever way the fight went, death would be present at the end. Guy of Gisborne slipped on the wet grass and stumbled forward. Robin drew back to let him find his footing again, and Guy of Gisborne, pretending to be struggling to his feet, made a desperate lunge at Robin's legs. "Foul creature!" cried Robin. "You are indeed as black as men call you." Then Robin put from himself all clinging reluctance to take another human's life. Collecting all his strength, he went at his enemy, and striking with a sure blow, pierced the horse-skin hide and drove his sword deep into the black heart. With a terrible groan, Guy of Gisborne sank down to the damp earth. His cowl fell back, and he lay dead. Robin drew out his sword and wiped it clean on the wet grass. "It was time that your evil deeds should trouble the earth no longer," he said. "Mine was the hand chosen for the work." Although Robin knew that no man could blame him for killing such an evil being, he felt a great sadness come over him, and he knew that now his vow to Our Lady was broken. Everything must change. All through the winter and spring, rumours of King Richard's return ran like wildfire throughout England, but the summer brought news that the king had been captured and was being held prisoner in Austria. It was not for another 2 years after the English people had paid a great ransom for his release that King Richard was able to return to his own country. A juggler who had come north for the May Day fair brought the news to Nottingham, swearing that the king had landed on English soil. The July sun, striking through the oak leaves, made shimmers of light on the ground about the great oak. The outlaws had heard that a party of black-robed friars and their abbot were making their way along the west road. The abbot was mounted on a stalwart chestnut horse, the friars on mules, and from each friar's saddle hung money-bags that clinked sweetly as their mules trotted along. To let them pass through Sherwood without an invitation to dine would be churlish indeed, said Robin, when his men brought him the news. Prepare a feast worthy of our visitors, while I go to meet them. Robin took some 20 of his men with him, and strode out through the forest to greet his guests. Coming up with the party, he and his men stepped out in front of the riders, and Robin laid his hand on the horse's bridle. "Who are you that bar our way?" demanded the abbot, in a voice without any trace of fear. "I am Robin Hood. These are my men. We dwell in the greenwood, guarding the king's deer and righting wrongs as he would do were he here." "Indeed," said the abbot. "We are pleased to hear it. Come and bring your men with you," said Robin, "and you shall not want for a jug of ale or a game pie before we set you on your way again." "An invitation so forcibly thrust upon us could not be refused," said the abbot, "but we will come with you gladly." Robin's men surrounded the little group of friars, and with Robin walking by the abbot's side, they went straight to the great oak. "Why, what a kingdom!" cried the abbot as he looked around. "King Richard himself would not be ashamed to feast with you here." "Nor any more welcome," said Robin. And the outlaws, who had heard the abbot's words, chorused their agreement. When their guests were seated on fallen tree trunks, Robin asked them if they would not push back their hoods and reveal their faces. "That we may not do," said the abbot. "We are all under an oath to Our Lady that we shall not remove our hoods until our mission is completed." Robin called for meat and ale to be served to their guests. Unlike many of Robin's guests, the abbot and his friars ate heartily and drank well. "Now," said Robin at last, "the time has come to pay. All who dine here must pay for the cost of their meal, so that their gold may be shared amongst the poorer people." "Take what you will from our money-bags," said the abbot. "For that brave speech," said Robin, "I give you back the gold I would have taken." Few indeed have offered Robin Hood more than that for which he asked. But Tam Barley, who was sitting close to Robin, looked on the tall, regal figure of the abbot with suspicion. A thought came into Tam Barley's head, a thought so incredible that Tam, who was not given to fancies, was quite astonished at himself. But once the thought had arrived, it refused to leave. Tam looked shrewdly at the 5 friars, and saw that one of them, whose habit was somewhat askew, was wearing striped hose of scarlet and yellow. Tam Barley got quietly to his feet and slipped away from the feast. He hurried through the forest to find the hunting party of Sir Richard of Lee. Tam had seen it earlier in the day, and he knew that Sir Richard was the only person who could help him with this ridiculous notion, for he was an old knight whom Robin had helped in the past.
"Now," cried Little John, "let us set up a target and shoot for the sport of it."
The outlaws reached for their bows, while Robin twisted a garland of elm twigs and hung it from the trunk of a beech tree. "Let all stand the distance of the 3rd mark," he said, "and show our guests how straight a bow we men of Sherwood can draw." Little John shot first, and his 3 arrows all found their homes safely within the circle of elm. 30 outlaws took their turn, and of the 30, only 3 missed their mark. "The King of England would be proud of such a bodyguard," said the abbot, watching the shooting intently. "Proudly would we serve him," said Robin. "Light words easily spoken," said the abbot. "Would you leave your Sherwood for the king?" "For King Richard, the true king, we would go gladly," said Robin. "There is not one man here who would not crave a pardon from King Richard were he here." For the next round, the outlaws stood still further back from the garland. When all had shot, they cried to Robin Hood that he would shoot too. "By your leave," Robin said, leaving the abbot to take his stand further from the target than any other outlaw. The sun was hot and the ale strong, but Robin's 3 arrows flew straight and true, and all 3 hit the target. As the outlaws' cheers rang through the air, Tam Barley and Sir Richard of Lee, with 2 of his noblemen, hurried into the clearing. Instantly Sir Richard of Lee fell to his knees, and drawing off his hat, cried, "Your Majesty!" The abbot's black cowl fell back from his head, and he stood uncovered. Robin saw a tall, broad-shouldered man standing in front of him. The sunlight glistered on his hair and beard. His blue eyes were hard as sapphires, and his mouth was curved and strong-willed. He took off his abbot's disguise, and his doublet, encrusted with gold embroidery, outshone the sun itself. "It is the king, our true liege and majesty," cried Richard of Lee. "I have not seen your majesty since I fought at your side." "The king!" echoed Robin, kneeling before him. "Richard Lionheart, true king of England." As if a wind blew over a field of grasses, so the outlaws knelt before the king. Robin set his horn to his lips, summoning all his men until the whole space in front of the oak was filled with kneeling men. Only the king stood upright. "Mercy, your majesty," said Robin. "As you know, we are all outlaws here, and our deeds are black in the eyes of the sheriff and the church. But never have we been anything but loyal to the true throne of England. Grant us your pardon, and we will serve you faithfully and well." King Richard placed his hand on Robin Hood's shoulder. "Stand up," he said. "True bowmen of England, I will grant a free pardon to each and every one of you, if you, Robin Hood, will bring with you 50 of your best archers and serve me faithfully as my own bodyguard." "Right gladly will I do that," said Robin, as the outlaws cheered. "Then," said the king, "to all you men of Sherwood, I grant you my royal pardon." Sudden excitements and laughter blistered through the outlaws, the ale flowed and the sun blazed down, and so they feasted through the afternoon. "I think that the life you lead in Sherwood would have been much to my liking," said the king, as he wiped tears of laughter from his eyes. "It sounds in the telling a merry prank," said one of the king's nobles. "Should we have one last jest upon this Sheriff of Nottingham?" the king said, leaning toward Robin Hood, "so that he will not forget you? Do you have spare suits of Lincoln green?" "That we do," replied Robin, his blood rising at the thought of any trick to be played on the sheriff. From the forest of Sherwood, along the road to Nottingham, flowed a sea of men all dressed in Lincoln green, all with longbows in their hands. At their head rode Robin Hood and King Richard. The people of Nottingham, seeing this flood of outlaws bearing down upon them, cried in panic that Robin Hood and his band had left the forest and were coming to lay siege to their city. Some locked and bolted their doors, some grasped their children by their hands and fled, while others lined the road to cheer. Right up to the walls of Nottingham Castle came the outlaws, and found the gates fast barred and bolted. "Knock upon the gates," commanded King Richard, "and tell the sheriff we have come to visit him." Little John took his cudgel and beat a rain of blows upon the gates. "My master bids you open and let us in," he cried, "or we will break down your gates." The sheriff, seeing all the outlaws taking openly to the streets, was sure that the king, who had dined with him the night before, had been killed. He came to a window, a trembling, wave-faced figure, and looked down on the nightmare below him. "Open your gates," cried the king, pulling off his hood of Lincoln green. "I and my bodyguard will dine with you tonight." So the Sheriff of Nottingham entertained all those who had once been outlaws in Sherwood. He sat sourly watching them devour his food and wine, neither eating nor drinking himself. And although it was a jest much to Robin's liking, he too drank little and ate less, for tomorrow the king was to return to London, taking Robin and his archers with him. For 1 long year and 3 long months Robin Hood served King Richard, and each day his heart grew heavier, until his longing for Sherwood was like a millstone that he dragged with him everywhere he went. The life of the court sickened him with its falseness and double-dealing. Food lost its taste, wine its spirit. The scented air of the court was too flaccid for breath, and even his love for Marion and his skill with the longbow brought him no joy. Always, no matter what else he was doing, he thought of the greenwood, and often when he was alone, the words spoke themselves aloud. Sherwood, Sherwood. Within the first 6 months, nearly all the outlaws who had come to London with Robin had returned to Nottinghamshire. Some crept away without a word, others made awkward excuses. Even Little John and Friar Tuck had left. The king had been sorely displeased to see his bodyguard slipping away in this fashion. One morning in October, Robin went to the courtroom at Westminster Palace. He sat there with the other petitioners waiting for King Richard. When the king arrived, Robin took his turn and knelt down before the king. "May it please your majesty to grant me leave to return to Sherwood," he said. The king scowled, drawing down his brows. He was little pleased with the outlaw band. Away from their own forest, they had proved to have had little discipline, and as they practiced less, so their skills with the bow declined. "So you too would run away?" Richard asked. "Next month we set sail for France. What will you do then, my bold Robin Hood?" At the king's words, Robin bowed his head. He knew that whatever happened, he could not go to France without seeing Sherwood again. "Sire, give me leave to go." "For 7 days," said the king. "Then you must return to me." Without delay, Robin saddled horses for himself and Marion and set out for Nottingham. When they reached Nottingham, they spent a night with Sir Richard of Lee, and Robin left Marion there in the knight's safe-keeping while he rode on alone to Sherwood. Before he reached the great oak, Robin took off the clothes he had worn at court and dressed himself in the Lincoln green which he had kept with him since he left Sherwood. At the oak, he set his horn to his lips and blew 3 blasts. Little John reached Robin first, and then in 2s and 3s the outlaws came running to greet their master until the forest was ringing with the name of Robin Hood. They built huge fires and held a great feast with archery and ale, and told tales of the time they had spent apart. The 7 days' leave which the king had given to Robin flew past on wings, but Robin paid no heed to their passing, for long before the 7 days were over, he had forgotten all about his promise to return. Richard and his court had vanished from Robin's mind, less substantial than the dawn's mists. For 20 years, Robin and his band lived the free life of the greenwood, new men joining them, others returning to the life they had left. Marion died of a fever, and when she was gone, Robin grieved sorely, for the world without Marion seemed a hollow, empty place. His bow lay idle, and for the first time, younger members of the band were able to outshoot their master, and, although they had not noticed it before, they became aware of Robin's age. "My flesh is heavy on my spirit," Robin said to Little John as they sat together. A sickness gnaws my bones. It comes to me that my cousin, the prioress of Kirklees Abbey, is skilled at the letting of blood, and mine these days is of so bad a hue I would have some taken from me. To go into an abbey is to put your head in a noose. All churchmen hate us and would see us dead. We have played too many jests for any to treat us well. She is my kin, insisted Robin, and would do me no harm. The prioress came to the abbey door, and was little pleased to see her outlawed cousin. She listened to Robin, and agreed to blood him in the hope that it would cure his sickness. "Do not go with her," whispered Little John urgently. "Do not trust her." He could see the evil scheming mind prioress disguised beneath her nun's robes, and her folded white hands. "Come back to Sherwood." But Robin, leaning heavily on the prioress's arm, went with her into the dark of the abbey. When Little John tried to follow them, the prioress told him to remain outside, and Little John, who could have tackled 10 men single-handed, stood and watched his master taken up a stone stairway. Then he turned away to wait in the abbey grounds. The prioress laid Robin on a bed in a stone cell at the top of the stairs. Skilfully she cut an artery in his arm so that he might bleed. Then she went out of the room, locking the door behind her. Robin lay and felt his strength flow out of him, but gradually, as the prioress did not return, he realized that she had left him to die. He struggled to sit upright and staunch the flow of blood, but he was already too weak and fell back in a swoon. When he came to himself again, he rolled from the bed to the floor. Stretching out, he just managed to reach his horn and draw it towards himself. Clasping it in his hand, he dragged himself across to a slit window, and, pushing himself up on one elbow, he put his horn to his lips. He blew it for the last time, a sad, weak note that made him laugh. It was so feeble a thing. But Little John heard the sound. He sprang up and tore through the abbey grounds, raged into the abbey, scattering the flutter of nuns, and raced up the stairs where he had last seen Robin. At the top of the stairs he came to the locked door. Setting his shoulder against it, he charged through it into the room. A bloody sight met his eyes, and in the midst of the shambles, his beloved master lay by the window, his horn fallen from his hand. "Master," cried Little John, "what deed has brought you to this? Come, I shall carry you back to Sherwood." "Too late," said Robin, his voice a harsh breath of sound. "I beg you, fit an arrow to my bow. I would draw it for one last time." Little John did so, and supported his master in his arms, while Robin took aim through the window and sent his last arrow soaring into space. "It flies!" cried Little John, watching the arrow, but Robin sank back into his arms, exhausted. "Bury me where it falls," he whispered, and felt the heavy drag of his own death tightening on his heart. He would dance the greenwood dance no more, and fear opened like a pit at his feet. Robin's breath rattled in his throat, and he slumped back, dead, into Little John's arms. They buried Robin Hood where his arrow had fallen, and when the burial was over, Alan a Dale went on down the long roads of England, playing his harp and singing the ballads of Robin Hood, which he had sung so often round the outlaw's fire. The wind caught up the words and sent them blowing through time and space. Little John, Maid Marion, Friar Tuck, and the magic names that echo in our dreams. Robin Hood and Sherwood.